The morning sun cast long shadows across the animal shelter's concrete floors as Sarah Martinez unlocked the main entrance. As the head caretaker at Mountain View Animal Rescue, she had seen countless dogs come through these doors over the past 8 years. Some arrived as playful puppies, others as senior dogs whose families could no longer care for them. But the dog that had been brought in 3 days ago was different from any she had encountered before. In kennel number 7 sat a magnificent Siberian Husky with striking blue eyes and a thick coat of black and white fur. His name was Storm according to the paperwork, and he was only 3 years old. What made Storm unique wasn't his beautiful appearance or impressive size. It was the complete silence that surrounded him. Since his arrival, Storm hadn't made a single sound. No barking, no whimpering, no howling that Huskies were famous for. He simply sat in the corner of his kennel, staring at the wall with empty eyes that seemed to have lost all hope. The story of how Storm ended up at the shelter was heartbreaking. His previous owner, an elderly man named Robert Chen, had rescued Storm as a puppy from another shelter 2 years earlier. Robert lived alone in a small apartment and had hoped that Storm would be the perfect companion for his retirement years. The two had formed a strong bond, spending their days taking long walks through the neighborhood park and their evenings watching television together on the couch. Everything changed when Robert suffered a massive heart attack while walking. Storm one winter evening. Neighbors found Robert collapsed on the sidewalk with Storm sitting loyally beside him, refusing to leave his side even as paramedics worked to save Robert's life. Despite their best efforts, Robert passed away at the hospital that night. Storm waited by the front door of Robert's apartment for 3 days, not understanding why his beloved human never came home. Robert's daughter, Linda, lived across the country and had never been comfortable around dogs. When she flew in to handle her father's affairs, she made the difficult decision to surrender Storm to the local animal shelter. She couldn't take him with her, and she didn't know anyone else who could provide the care and attention that such a large, energetic breed required. The shelter staff had tried everything to help Storm adjust to his new environment. They offered him his favorite treats, took him on extra walks, and even played calming music in his kennel area. Volunteers spent hours sitting beside his cage, talking to him softly and trying to coax some response. But Storm remained withdrawn and unresponsive, as if he had simply given up on life. Dr. Amanda Foster, the shelter's veterinarian, had examined Storm thoroughly and found him to be in perfect physical health. His vaccinations were up to date, his weight was ideal, and there were no signs of illness or injury. The problem was clearly emotional. Storm was grieving the loss of his human companion, and the trauma of abandonment had left him in a state of deep depression. Sarah had worked with traumatized animals before, but Storm's case was particularly challenging. Most dogs, even those who had experienced loss or abuse, would eventually show some signs of improvement. With patience and consistent care, they might eat a little more each day, wag their tails when volunteers approached, or show interest in toys or other dogs. Storm showed none of these positive signs. He ate just enough to survive, ignored all attempts at play, and seemed completely indifferent to the presence of humans or other animals. The other dogs in the shelter seemed to sense Storm's sadness. Even the most playful and energetic dogs would quiet down when they passed his kennel, as if they understood that their new neighbor needed space to heal. The cats in the adjacent area, typically curious about any new arrivals, gave Storm's kennel a wide berth, seeming to instinctively know that he wasn't ready for their attention. As days turned into weeks, the shelter staff grew increasingly concerned about Storm's condition. Dogs who remained in this state of depression for extended periods sometimes never recovered. There was also the practical consideration that the shelter had limited space and resources. If Storm couldn't be adopted soon, difficult decisions would have to be made about his future. Sarah found herself spending extra time with Storm during her shifts. She would sit outside his kennel during her lunch breaks, eating her sandwich while talking to him about her day, her own pets at home, and anything else that came to mind. She told him about the other dogs who had found loving homes, about the volunteers who came in every weekend to help with walks and playtime, and about the beautiful hiking trails in the mountains surrounding their town that he might enjoy someday. Storm never responded to these one-sided conversations, but Sarah noticed that he would sometimes turn his head slightly in her direction when she spoke. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign that he was still aware of the world around him. She began to hope that somewhere deep inside, Storm's spirit was still alive and might eventually find its way back to the surface. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Sarah was cleaning the kennels. She had been humming an old folk song that her grandmother used to sing to her as a child. The melody was simple and haunting, with a rhythm that seemed to echo the natural cadence of human speech. As she swept the floor near Storm's kennel, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Storm had lifted his head and was looking directly at her for the first time since his arrival. His blue eyes, which had been dull and lifeless for weeks, seemed to show a flicker of interest. More surprisingly, his mouth was slightly open, and his breathing had changed in a way that suggested he was preparing to make a sound. Sarah continued humming the same song, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Storm's head tilted to one side and then to the other, as if he were trying to understand what he was hearing. His ears, which had been flat against his head since his arrival, began to perk up slightly. For several minutes they remained in this position, Sarah humming softly and Storm listening with growing attention. Then, just as Sarah finished the song and was about to move on to the next kennel, Storm opened his mouth and produced a sound unlike anything anyone at the shelter had ever heard before. The sound that emerged from Storm's throat was not a typical howl that people expected from a husky. Instead, it was something entirely unique, a melodic, almost musical vocalization that seemed to blend howling with singing. It started low and soft, then rose and fell in waves that perfectly matched the rhythm of the folk song Sarah had been humming. The sound was so unexpected and beautiful that Sarah dropped her broom and stared in amazement. Storm's singing lasted for nearly 30 seconds, during which his entire posture changed. His head lifted high, his chest expanded, and for the first time in weeks his tail showed the slightest movement. When he finished, he looked directly at Sarah with an expression that seemed almost hopeful, as if he were asking whether he had done something right. Word spread quickly through the shelter about Storm's remarkable vocalization. Dr. Foster was the first to come running when Sarah called out excitedly about the breakthrough. Other staff members and volunteers gathered around kennel number 7, hoping to hear the unusual sound for themselves. But Storm had retreated back into his corner and wouldn't make another peep, no matter how much they encouraged him. That evening, Sarah stayed late at the shelter, determined to understand what had triggered Storm's response. She tried humming the same folk song again, but Storm simply watched her without making a sound. She tried other songs, different melodies, even playing music from her phone, but nothing worked. As closing time approached, Sarah began to wonder if she had imagined the whole thing. Just as she was about to give up and head home, she began humming the folk song one more time. But this time she changed her approach. Instead of just humming the melody, she began to add words, singing the song as her grandmother had taught her years ago. The lyrics were simple and comforting, telling the story of a lonely traveler who found his way home through the guidance of the stars. Storm's reaction was immediate, and even more dramatic than before. He rose to his feet, moved to the front of his kennel, and began his unusual howling singing again. This time, however, it was different. He seemed to be trying to match not just the melody but also the rhythm of the words. His vocalizations rose and fell with the verses, creating an otherworldly duet that filled the shelter with hauntingly beautiful music. Dr. Foster, who had stayed late to observe, was fascinated by what she witnessed. She had never seen or heard anything quite like it in all her years of veterinary practice. Storm wasn't just howling. He was genuinely attempting to communicate through music, responding to human song with his own unique vocal interpretation. It was as if he had found a way to express emotions that regular barking or howling couldn't convey. Over the following days, Sarah experimented with different songs and discovered that Storm had very specific preferences. He responded most strongly to slower, melodic tunes with clear emotional content. Folk songs, ballads, and even some classical pieces would inspire his musical responses, while faster songs or those with harsh tones left him uninterested. Most remarkably, he seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the emotional content of the songs. Sad songs would elicit long, mournful vocalizations that brought tears to the eyes of listeners, while more upbeat melodies inspired lighter, more playful sounds. The transformation in Storm's overall behavior was remarkable. Once he began singing, other aspects of his personality started to emerge. He began eating with more enthusiasm, His tail wagged occasionally when familiar staff members approached, and he even showed interest in toys for the first time since his arrival. It was as if music had unlocked something deep within his spirit that grief had temporarily buried. Dr. Foster theorized that Storm's unique response to music might be connected to his life with Robert. Perhaps the elderly man had been a music lover who regularly sang or played instruments in the apartment. Music might have been such an integral part of Storm's daily experience with his beloved owner that it served as a bridge back to happier memories and a way of processing his grief. The shelter staff began incorporating music into Storm's daily routine. Volunteers would sit beside his kennel during their visits, singing softly or humming while they brushed his coat or simply kept him company. Each person seemed to bring out different aspects of Storm's musical abilities. Some volunteers discovered that he preferred certain keys or tempos, while others found that he would only respond to female voices or particular types of songs. As word of Storm's musical talent spread beyond the shelter, local media began to take notice. A reporter from the town newspaper visited to write a human interest story about the singing Husky, who had captured everyone's hearts. The article, titled "Shelter Dog Finds His Voice Through Music," included a photo of Storm with his head tilted back in mid-howl and described his remarkable journey from silent grief to musical expression. The newspaper story caught the attention of Maria Santos, a music teacher at the local elementary school, who had been looking for a companion dog for several months. Maria had grown up with Huskies and understood their need for mental stimulation and physical exercise. More importantly, she was intrigued by Storm's apparent connection to music and wondered if he might enjoy being part of a household where music was a central part of daily life. Maria called the shelter to inquire about visiting Storm and potentially beginning the adoption process. Sarah was excited about the possibility but also nervous. Storm had made tremendous progress, but he was still a sensitive dog who would need an understanding and patient owner. The adoption process would need to be handled carefully to ensure that Storm wouldn't experience another traumatic separation. When Maria arrived at the shelter for her first meeting with Storm, she came prepared with her acoustic guitar. She had taught elementary school music for 15 years and had seen how music could reach children who struggled with traditional forms of communication. She hoped that her musical background might help her connect with this special dog who had found his voice through song. The meeting took place in one of the shelter's quiet visitation rooms. Storm entered cautiously, staying close to Sarah's side and eyeing the stranger warily. Maria sat on the floor with her guitar, making no sudden movements and speaking in soft, gentle tones. She began by simply talking to Storm, telling him about herself, her home, and her love of music. After several minutes of quiet conversation, Maria began to play a simple melody on her guitar. Storm's response was immediate and more dramatic than anything the shelter staff had witnessed before. He approached Maria slowly, his ears perked forward with intense interest. As she continued to play, he began to vocalize, creating a harmony that complemented her guitar perfectly. The sound of Storm's voice blending with Maria's guitar created something magical in that small room. It was as if two musicians who had never met before were improvising together, finding a common language through melody and rhythm. Maria was moved to tears by the beauty and emotional depth of Storm's response, while the shelter staff watched in amazement as this breakthrough unfolded before their eyes. The adoption process for Storm was unlike any other that Mountain View Animal Rescue had ever conducted. Typically, potential adopters would visit a few times, fill out paperwork, and take their new pet home within a week or two. But Maria and the shelter staff all agreed that Storm needed a more gradual transition to prevent another traumatic separation experience. Maria began visiting Storm 3 times a week, spending an hour each time sitting with him and playing music. During these sessions, Storm's confidence grew visibly. He would approach Maria more quickly with each visit, and his vocalizations became more complex and expressive. Sometimes he would seem to be telling her stories through his unique howling songs, with different tones and rhythms that suggested various emotions and experiences. Dr. Foster documented these sessions carefully, noting that Storm's musical responses seemed to indicate different things depending on the context. When Maria played gentle, soothing melodies, Storm would produce soft, comforting sounds that resembled lullabies. When she played more energetic folk tunes, his vocalizations became playful and almost conversational. as if he were joining in a happy discussion with an old friend. The most touching moments came when Maria played sad or nostalgic songs. During these pieces, Storm's voice would take on a deeply emotional quality that seemed to express his grief over losing Robert, while also showing his gratitude for the care he was receiving. These sessions appeared to be therapeutic for Storm, allowing him to process his emotions in a way that traditional animal therapy techniques hadn't achieved. After 6 weeks of regular visits, Maria and the shelter team decided it was time for Storm to visit Maria's home for the first time. The house was a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a large fenced yard that would give Storm plenty of space to run and explore. Inside, the house reflected Maria's love of music, with instruments displayed on the walls, sheet music scattered across tables, and a piano positioned prominently in the living room. Storm's first visit to Maria's home was carefully planned and supervised. Sarah accompanied them to help with the transition, bringing Storm's favorite blanket and some familiar toys from the shelter. The plan was for a short visit of just 2 hours, allowing Storm to explore the new environment without feeling overwhelmed or abandoned. As soon as Storm entered the house, his behavior changed dramatically. Instead of the cautious, hesitant dog they expected, Storm immediately began exploring every room with obvious excitement. He sniffed at the various instruments, examined the music books, and even approached the piano with curiosity. When Maria sat down at the piano and began to play a simple melody, Storm positioned himself right beside the bench and began to sing along, with such enthusiasm that both Maria and Sarah burst into laughter, the sound of Storm's voice echoing through. Maria's house created an atmosphere of joy and warmth that filled every corner of the space. The acoustics of the room seemed to enhance his vocalizations, making them richer and more resonant than they had ever sounded in the concrete confines of the shelter. It was as if Storm had found his true home, a place where his unique gift could flourish and be appreciated. During that first visit, something remarkable happened that convinced everyone that Maria and Storm were meant to be together. Maria had been playing a complex classical piece on the piano when she noticed that Storm was no longer simply howling along randomly. Instead, he was actually following the melody, anticipating the chord changes, and even harmonizing with certain passages. It was clear that this dog had an extraordinary musical intelligence that went far beyond simple imitation. Sarah was amazed by what she witnessed. In all her years of working with animals, she had never seen a dog respond to music with such sophistication and understanding. Storm wasn't just making noise. He was genuinely participating in the musical experience, contributing his own voice to create something beautiful and meaningful. The adoption was finalized the following week, with Storm moving into Maria's home permanently. The transition went more smoothly than anyone had dared to hope. Storm settled into his new routine quickly, seeming to understand that this was his forever home and that Maria was his new family. The daily music sessions became the highlight of both their days, with Storm eagerly waiting by the piano each morning for their musical collaboration to begin. Maria began to experiment with different types of music to see how Storm would respond. She discovered that he had preferences not just for certain melodies, but also for specific instruments. He seemed to favor acoustic instruments over electronic ones, and he was particularly responsive to stringed instruments like guitar and violin. When Maria played her flute, Storm would produce softer, more ethereal sounds that seemed to float through the air like a gentle breeze. Word of Storm's remarkable musical abilities continued to spread throughout the community. Friends and neighbors would stop by Maria's house hoping to hear the famous singing Husky for themselves. Most were skeptical at first, unable to believe that a dog could truly make music rather than just noise. But once they heard Storm's sophisticated vocalizations and watched him interact with Maria's playing, they became believers and often left the house with tears in their eyes from the beauty of what they had experienced. The local music community began to take notice as well. Other musicians visited Maria's home to jam with Storm, discovering that he could adapt his vocalizations to work with different musical styles and instruments. A folk singer found that Storm could provide beautiful backing vocals for her performances. A classical violinist discovered that Storm had an intuitive understanding of harmony and could create counter melodies that enhanced her playing. These musical collaborations seemed to have a profound effect on Storm's overall well-being. The depression and trauma that had defined his early weeks at the shelter were completely gone, replaced by a joyful enthusiasm for life that was infectious to everyone around him. He had gained weight, his coat was glossy and healthy, and his eyes sparkled with the intelligence and humor that were characteristic of his breed. Maria began to realize that Storm's musical gift was not just entertaining, but potentially therapeutic. She had noticed that when she was feeling stressed or sad after difficult days at school, their evening music sessions would help her relax and find peace. Storm seemed to sense her moods and would adjust his vocalizations accordingly, providing exactly the type of musical comfort she needed. This observation gave Maria an idea that would change both their lives in ways they never could have imagined. She began to research the field of animal-assisted therapy, particularly programs that use dogs to help people cope with emotional trauma, illness, or disability. She wondered if Storm's unique musical abilities might make him an exceptional therapy dog who could reach people in ways that traditional therapy animals couldn't. The more she learned about therapy dog programs, the more excited Maria became about the possibilities. Storm had already demonstrated his ability to respond to human emotions through music, and his gentle, intuitive nature made him naturally suited for working with people who needed comfort and healing. She began to envision Storm visiting hospitals, nursing homes, and schools, sharing his gift of music with those who needed it most. The process of training Storm to become a certified therapy dog was both challenging and rewarding. Maria enrolled them both in a specialized program that combined traditional therapy dog training with techniques specifically designed for animals with unique abilities. The program required Storm to demonstrate not only his musical talents, but also his ability to remain calm and responsive in various environments and situations. The training took place at the Regional Therapy Animal Center, where experienced instructors worked with human-animal teams to prepare them for visits to hospitals, nursing homes, schools, and other facilities. Storm's initial evaluation revealed that while he was naturally gentle and intuitive, he needed to learn how to control his enthusiasm and respond appropriately to different types of people and situations. The first challenge was teaching Storm when it was appropriate to use his voice and when silence was required. In some therapy situations, his musical vocalizations would be welcomed and beneficial, but in others, such as hospital rooms where patients were sleeping or recovering from surgery, quiet companionship would be more appropriate. Maria worked with professional trainers to develop hand signals and verbal cues that would help Storm understand what was expected of him in different contexts. Storm proved to be an eager and intelligent student. He quickly learned to read Maria's signals and respond accordingly. When she gave him the quiet signal, he would remain silent but would still show his engagement through body language and gentle physical contact. When she gave him the sing signal, he would begin his musical vocalizations, adjusting his volume and intensity based on additional cues from Maria. The training program also exposed Storm to various scenarios he might encounter during therapy visits. He practiced walking on different types of floors, navigating around medical equipment and remaining calm in the presence of wheelchairs, walkers, and other mobility devices. He learned to approach people gently and to back away respectfully if someone seemed uncomfortable or uninterested in interacting with him. One of the most important aspects of Storm's training was learning to respond to human emotions appropriately. The trainers created scenarios where volunteers acted out different emotional states: sadness, fear, anxiety, excitement, and others. Storm's natural empathy combined with his musical abilities made him exceptionally skilled at this aspect of therapy work. He seemed to instinctively know when someone needed comfort, when they wanted to be energized, or when they simply needed a quiet, supportive presence. After 3 months of intensive training, Storm and Maria were ready for their certification test. The evaluation took place at a local nursing home, where they were observed interacting with residents and staff in real-world conditions. Storm performed beautifully, demonstrating his ability to adapt his behavior to each individual's needs and preferences. During the test, Storm encountered an elderly woman named Helen, who was sitting alone in the common room, staring out the window with a sad expression. When Maria approached with Storm, Helen initially showed no interest in interacting with them. But when Maria began to hum a song from the 1940s, Storm joined in with his unique vocalizations, creating a beautiful duet that caught Helen's attention immediately. It turned out that the song was one that Helen remembered from her youth, and hearing Storm's interpretation of it brought back happy memories of dancing with her late husband. Helen began to smile for the first time in weeks, and she spent the next 20 minutes telling Maria and Storm stories about her past while Storm listened attentively and occasionally added his own musical commentary to her tales. This interaction demonstrated exactly what made Storm special as a therapy dog. He wasn't just providing comfort through his presence. He was actively engaging with people through music, creating shared experiences that helped them connect with positive memories and emotions. The certification evaluators were so impressed that they recommended Storm for advanced therapy work with special populations. Storm and Maria's first official therapy visits began at Sunset Manor, a local nursing home where many residents suffered from dementia and other cognitive impairments. The activities director, Janet Morrison, had been skeptical about bringing a singing dog to work with her residents, but she was willing to try anything that might help improve their quality of life. Their first visit exceeded everyone's expectations. In the memory care unit, they encountered residents who rarely spoke or showed interest in activities. But when Storm began to vocalize along with Maria's guitar playing, something magical happened. Residents who hadn't spoken in months began to hum along with the music. Others started tapping their feet or moving their hands in rhythm with Storm's unique melodies. One resident, a former music teacher named Arthur who had been silent for over a year, suddenly began conducting an imaginary orchestra when Storm started singing. Arthur's family, who happened to be visiting that day, wept with joy to see their loved one responding to something again. The nursing staff was amazed by the transformation they witnessed in many of their residents during that single visit. The success at Sunset Manor led to invitations from other facilities throughout the region. Storm and Maria began visiting children's hospitals, where young patients dealing with serious illnesses found comfort and joy in Storm's musical performances. At the Pediatric Oncology Ward of Regional Medical Center, Storm seemed to understand intuitively that children needed different types of musical interaction than elderly adults. With young patients, Storm would often engage in playful musical conversations where the children would try to imitate his sounds, and he would respond with variations and embellishments. These interactions brought laughter and smiles to rooms that were often filled with fear and sadness. Parents and medical staff frequently commented that Storm's visits provided their children with something that traditional therapy and entertainment couldn't offer, a genuine connection with another living being who communicated through the universal language of music. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a pediatric psychologist at the hospital, began documenting the effects of Storm's visits on her young patients. She observed that children who had been withdrawn or anxious often showed marked improvement in their mood and cooperation with medical treatments after spending time with Storm. Some children, who had been reluctant to speak about their fears, would open up during Storm's musical sessions, finding it easier to express their emotions when Storm was singing along with their conversations. Storm's reputation as a therapy dog began to spread beyond their local community. News outlets picked up the story of the Husky, who used music to heal hearts and minds, and soon Maria and Storm were receiving invitations from facilities across the state. They began traveling to other cities and towns, bringing Storm's unique form of therapy to people who had never experienced anything like it before. Each new location brought different challenges and rewards. At a veterans hospital, Storm worked with former soldiers dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. His calm presence and soothing vocalizations helped many veterans relax during therapy sessions and group meetings. Some veterans found that Storm's musical responses to their own humming or singing helped them process difficult emotions and memories in a safe, non-judgmental environment. At a school for children with autism and other developmental disabilities, Storm learned to work with students who processed sensory input differently than typical children. His trainers taught him to modulate his vocalizations to avoid overwhelming sensitive hearing, and he learned to recognize when a child needed space versus when they wanted interaction. Many of the students found Storm's predictable musical responses comforting and began using their interactions with him as a way to practice communication and social skills. The impact of Storm's therapy work extended beyond the people he visited directly. Family members, caregivers, and medical professionals who witnessed his sessions often found their own stress levels reduced and their outlook improved. Storm's joyful approach to life and his obvious love for what he was doing reminded everyone around him of the healing power of music and the special bond between humans and animals. As Storm's reputation as a musical therapy dog continued to grow, Maria began receiving requests for visits that went beyond traditional therapy settings. Concert halls, music festivals, and even recording studios wanted to feature Storm's unique abilities. While Maria was initially hesitant to expose Storm to the commercial music world, she eventually realized that these opportunities could help spread awareness about the healing power of music and animal-assisted therapy. Their first major public performance took place at the annual Mountain Valley Folk Music Festival, where organizers had invited Storm and Maria to demonstrate how animals and humans could create music together. The festival attracted thousands of music lovers from across the region, and many attendees were skeptical about whether a dog could truly contribute to musical performances rather than simply making noise alongside human musicians. Maria and Storm took the stage on a sunny Saturday afternoon, with Maria carrying her acoustic guitar and Storm walking confidently beside her. The large outdoor audience grew quiet as Maria began to play a gentle folk melody that had become one of Storm's favorites. Within moments, Storm lifted his head and began his distinctive vocalizations, creating harmonies that perfectly complemented Maria's playing. The audience's initial murmurs of curiosity quickly turned to gasps of amazement as they realized they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. Storm wasn't just howling randomly, he was genuinely participating in the musical performance, responding to changes in tempo and key, and even taking solo sections where his voice carried the melody while Maria provided rhythmic accompaniment on her guitar. The performance lasted 15 minutes and included 3 different songs that showcased various aspects of Storm's musical abilities. During a lively Irish folk tune, his vocalizations became playful and energetic, matching the celebratory mood of the music. For a haunting ballad about lost love, Storm's voice took on a mournful, deeply emotional quality that brought tears to many listeners' eyes. The final song was an improvised piece where Maria and Storm seemed to have a musical conversation, with each responding to the other's musical phrases in a spontaneous dialogue. When the performance ended, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause that lasted several minutes. Many people approached the stage afterward to express their amazement and ask questions about Storm's abilities. Several professional musicians in attendance requested Maria's contact information, hoping to collaborate with Storm on future projects. The festival organizers immediately invited them to return the following year as featured performers. The success of the folk festival performance led to more opportunities for Storm and Maria to share their musical partnership with wider audiences. They were invited to perform at benefit concerts for animal shelters and rescue organizations, where Storm's story of transformation from a grieving, silent dog to a joyful musical companion inspired many people to consider adoption and support for animal welfare causes. During one particularly memorable benefit concert for the Regional Animal Rescue Network, Storm's performance was preceded by a video presentation about his journey from the shelter to his current life as a therapy dog. The audience learned about his initial depression following Robert's death, his breakthrough moment with Sarah at the shelter, and his development into a certified therapy animal who brought comfort to people in hospitals, nursing homes, and schools. When Storm took the stage after this introduction, the audience was already emotionally invested in his story. His performance that night seemed especially inspired, with vocalizations that conveyed not just musical beauty, but also a sense of gratitude and joy that touched everyone present. The benefit concert raised more money for animal rescue organizations than any previous event in the network's history, demonstrating how Storm's story and talents could make a real difference in the lives of other animals in need. Recording studios began reaching out to Maria and Storm, interested in capturing their musical collaborations on albums. The first recording session took place at Harmony Studios, a small independent facility known for working with folk and acoustic artists. The sound engineers were initially puzzled about how to properly record Storm's vocalizations, but they quickly discovered that his voice had remarkable clarity and tonal quality that translated beautifully to recordings. The resulting album, titled Songs of the Heart, featured 12 tracks that showcased different aspects of Storm's musical abilities. Some songs were gentle lullabies, perfect for relaxation and meditation, while others were more energetic pieces that celebrated the joy of life and friendship. The album included liner notes that told Storm's complete story and explained how proceeds from sales would support animal rescue, organizations and music therapy programs. When Songs of the Heart was released, it received attention from music critics and animal lovers alike. Several tracks became popular on streaming platforms, with listeners commenting about how Storm's vocalizations helped them relax, process emotions, or simply experience something beautiful and unique. The album's success led to requests for Storm and Maria to perform on radio shows and podcast interviews, further spreading their message about the healing power of music and the remarkable bonds possible between humans and animals. One of the most significant developments in Storm's career came when Dr. Elena Vasquez, a researcher at the university's Animal Behavior Institute, approached Maria about participating in a formal study of Storm's musical abilities. Dr. Vasquez had been following Storm's story through media coverage and was fascinated by the implications of his sophisticated musical responses for understanding animal cognition and communication. The research study involved several months of controlled experiments designed to test the limits and nature of Storm's musical abilities. Researchers played various types of music for Storm while monitoring his vocalizations, brain activity, and stress indicators. They discovered that Storm's responses to music involved complex cognitive processing that went far beyond simple imitation or conditioning. Brain imaging studies revealed that when Storm heard music, the areas of his brain associated with emotional processing, pattern recognition, and social bonding became highly active. This suggested that Storm's musical responses were genuinely emotional and social in nature, rather than just learned behaviors designed to please his human companions. The research also showed that Storm could distinguish between different musical keys, recognize recurring melodies, and even predict chord progressions in familiar songs. The study's findings were published in the Journal of Animal Cognition and attracted international attention from researchers, musicians, and animal behaviorists. Storm's case provided new insights into the potential for interspecies communication through music and suggested that the emotional and cognitive lives of dogs might be more complex than previously understood. As word of the research spread, Storm and Maria began receiving invitations to speak at academic conferences and professional gatherings. They presented at veterinary medicine conferences, animal behavior symposiums, and music therapy conventions, sharing Storm's story and its implications for both animal welfare and human healing. These presentations helped establish Storm as not just an entertainer, but as a legitimate subject of scientific interest who was contributing to human knowledge about animal intelligence and emotion. The scientific recognition of Storm's abilities opened new doors for their therapy work as well. Hospitals and treatment centers that had been hesitant to try animal-assisted therapy became more interested when they learned about the research supporting Storm's unique abilities. Medical professionals began referring patients specifically to work with Storm and Maria, recognizing that their musical approach to therapy offered benefits that traditional methods couldn't provide. Through all of these developments, Maria was careful to ensure that Storm's well-being remained the top priority. Despite the increasing demands on their time and the growing attention from media and researchers, Maria carefully monitored Storm's stress levels and ensured that he had plenty of downtime between performances and therapy sessions. She established strict guidelines about the types of events they would accept and the frequency of their appearances, always prioritizing Storm's physical and emotional health over public demand for their services. That the balance between Storm's public life and his need for normalcy became even more important when Maria noticed subtle changes in his behavior during their 4th year together. While Storm remained enthusiastic about music and therapy work, he seemed to need longer recovery periods between intensive sessions. His vocalizations, while still beautiful and responsive, sometimes showed signs of vocal strain after particularly demanding performances. Dr. Foster, who had remained Storm's veterinarian since his shelter days, recommended a modified schedule that would allow Storm to continue his therapy work while protecting his long-term health. They reduced the number of public performances and focused more on small group therapy sessions where Storm could work at a more relaxed pace. This adjustment actually enhanced the quality of their work, as Storm seemed more energetic and creative when he wasn't overstimulated by constant travel and performance pressure. During this period of reduced public appearances, Storm and Maria developed some of their most meaningful relationships with the people they served. At Sunrise Assisted Living, they began working with Margaret Chen, a 92-year-old former opera singer who had lost her ability to speak clearly due to a stroke. Margaret's family had been devastated by her condition, as music had been the center of her life for nearly 8 decades. When Storm first met Margaret, she was sitting quietly in her wheelchair, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. But when Maria began playing piano and Storm started his gentle vocalizations, Margaret's eyes suddenly focused with an intensity that her family hadn't seen since before her stroke. Storm seemed to sense something special about Margaret and approached her chair slowly, resting his head gently on her lap while continuing to vocalize softly. What happened next amazed everyone present. Margaret began to move her lips as if trying to sing along with Storm's vocalizations. While she couldn't produce clear words, she was able to create melodic sounds that harmonized with Storm's voice. For the first time since her stroke, Margaret was participating in music again, and the joy on her face was unmistakable. This breakthrough led to regular sessions between Storm, Maria, and Margaret. Over several months, Margaret's vocalizations became stronger and more controlled. While she never regained her full speaking ability, she was able to communicate through musical sounds with Storm in a way that brought her tremendous happiness and gave her family hope. Margaret's daughter, later, said that Storm had given her mother back the one thing that mattered most to her, the ability to make music. Similar profound connections developed at other facilities where Storm and Maria worked regularly. At the Children's Hospital, they formed a special bond with 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez, who was undergoing treatment for leukemia. Tommy had been an outgoing, talkative child before his diagnosis, but the stress of treatment had made him withdrawn and fearful. Storm's first meeting with Tommy was challenging, as the boy was too frightened to interact with anyone, including his own parents. Maria decided to simply sit in Tommy's room with Storm, playing quiet music without asking for any response or participation. Storm seemed to understand the situation intuitively, and remained calm and patient, occasionally offering soft, comforting vocalizations that gradually helped Tommy relax. After several visits, Tommy began showing interest in Storm's musical responses. He started making small requests for specific songs and eventually began humming along with Storm's vocalizations. These musical interactions became a bright spot in Tommy's treatment routine, giving him something to look forward to during his hospital stays. The most remarkable development came when Tommy began creating his own songs about his experience with illness, using Storm's vocalizations as accompaniment. These musical expressions helped Tommy process his fears and frustrations in a way that traditional counseling hadn't achieved. His parents and medical team noticed significant improvements in his mood, cooperation with treatment, and overall resilience during the most difficult phases of his therapy. Tommy's oncologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, was so impressed by the positive effects of Storm's visits that she began recommending music therapy with Storm for other young patients facing serious medical challenges. She documented several cases where children showed improved treatment compliance, reduced anxiety, and better pain management when Storm was involved in their care plan. Word of Storm's therapeutic successes reached the attention of the National Association of Music Therapists, who invited Maria to present at their annual conference. The presentation, titled Interspecies Musical Healing Lessons from a Therapy Dog, drew one of the largest audiences in the conference's history. Maria shared video recordings of Storm's work with various populations, discussed the research into his abilities, and provided practical guidance for other music therapists interested in incorporating animals into their practice. The presentation led to collaborations with music therapy programs at universities across the country. Graduate students began visiting Maria and Storm to observe their techniques and develop their own approaches to animal-assisted music therapy. Several research projects were initiated to study whether other dogs could be trained to provide similar services, though none quite matched Storm's natural musical intuition and sophisticated vocal abilities. These academic connections opened new opportunities for Storm and Maria to contribute to the field of therapeutic intervention in ways they had never imagined. They participated in pilot programs testing the effectiveness of animal-assisted music therapy for various conditions, including autism spectrum disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dementia. The results consistently showed that participants who worked with Storm and Maria demonstrated greater improvement in communication skills, emotional regulation, and social engagement compared to those receiving traditional therapy approaches. One particularly significant study involved working with military veterans suffering from traumatic brain injuries. Many of these veterans had lost the ability to express themselves verbally or had difficulty processing complex emotions related to their service experiences. Storm's musical interactions provided a non-threatening way for these veterans to engage in therapeutic activities without feeling pressured to verbalize their trauma. During these sessions, Storm would respond to the veterans' emotional states through his vocalizations, creating musical conversations that helped participants externalize feelings they couldn't express in words. Several veterans reported that their sessions with Storm were the first time since their injuries that they felt truly understood and accepted. The success of this program led to Storm and Maria being invited to work with veteran treatment centers in multiple states. As Storm approached his 8th birthday, Maria began to think about the long-term sustainability of their work together. While Storm remained healthy and enthusiastic about music, she recognized that his energy levels were naturally declining with age. She started training a younger dog, a golden retriever named Melody, to potentially continue some aspects of their work. Though she knew that Storm's unique abilities couldn't be directly replicated, the training process with Melody revealed just how exceptional Storm's natural talents were. While Melody could be taught to vocalize on cue and respond to basic musical signals, she lacked Storm's intuitive understanding of harmony, emotion, and musical structure. This realization made Maria appreciate even more the rare gift that Storm possessed and the unlikely series of events that had brought them together. Rather than viewing Storm's aging as an ending, Maria began to see it as an opportunity to focus on documenting and preserving the knowledge they had gained together. She started writing a book about their experiences, hoping to inspire others to explore the therapeutic potential of music and animals. She also began developing training materials and workshops that could help other therapy teams incorporate musical elements into their work, even if they didn't have a dog with Storm's extraordinary abilities. The final chapter of Storm's remarkable journey began on a crisp autumn morning when Maria received a call that would bring his story full circle. Sarah Martinez from Mountain View Animal Rescue was on the line with news that made Maria's heart race with both excitement and nostalgia. The shelter was planning a special celebration to mark its 15th anniversary, and they wanted Storm to be the guest of honor. The event, scheduled for the following month, would celebrate the thousands of animals that had found loving homes through the shelter's work over the years. Sarah explained that Storm had become something of a legend at the shelter, representing the incredible transformation that was possible when rescued animals were given proper care, patience, and love. His story was often shared with potential adopters who were hesitant about taking on older or traumatized animals. Maria was deeply moved by the invitation and immediately agreed to participate. She knew that returning to the shelter would be emotional for both her and Storm, as it would bring back memories of his darkest days, as well as celebrate how far he had come. She also recognized that their appearance could inspire more people to consider adoption and support for animal rescue efforts. Preparations for the anniversary celebration became a community-wide effort. Local businesses donated supplies and services, volunteers worked tirelessly to organize activities and displays, and media outlets prepared special features about the shelter's impact on the community. The highlight of the event would be a concert featuring Storm and Maria, along with other local musicians who had been inspired by their story. As the celebration date approached, Maria noticed that Storm seemed to sense something special was happening. His energy levels increased and he appeared more excited about their daily music sessions than he had been in months. It was as if he understood that an important milestone was approaching and wanted to be at his best for whatever lay ahead. The night before the anniversary event, Maria sat with Storm in their living room, playing some of his favorite songs on her guitar while he provided his distinctive vocal accompaniment. As they made music together, she reflected on the incredible journey they had shared over the past 5 years. From a silent, grieving dog in a shelter kennel to an internationally recognized therapy animal who had touched thousands of lives, Storm's transformation had exceeded everyone's wildest dreams. The morning of the anniversary celebration dawned bright and clear, with perfect weather for the outdoor festivities. When Maria and Storm arrived at the shelter, they were greeted by dozens of familiar faces from their years of therapy work. Former patients, their families, medical professionals, and volunteers had all come to celebrate not just the shelter's anniversary, but Storm's remarkable contribution to their community. Dr. Foster was there with her current therapy animals in training, eager to see how Storm interacted with the younger dogs who were following in his footsteps. Sarah Martinez had prepared a special display featuring photos and news clippings documenting Storm's journey from his arrival at the shelter to his current status as a celebrated therapy dog. The display also included letters and artwork from children and adults whose lives had been touched by Storm's musical healing. The main event was a concert held in the shelter's outdoor courtyard, where a small stage had been set up for performers. Local musicians opened the show with songs celebrating the human-animal bond and the importance of animal rescue work. Children from Maria's school performed a song they had written about Storm's story, complete with their own attempts at howling harmonies that made the audience laugh with delight. When it was finally time for Storm and Maria to take the stage, a hush fell over the crowd of several hundred people. Many in the audience had heard recordings of Storm's vocalizations or seen videos of his performances, but most had never experienced his musical abilities in person. Maria began with a simple acoustic guitar piece, one of the first songs that had inspired Storm to find his voice years earlier at the shelter. Storm's response was immediate and more powerful than Maria had heard from him in months. His vocalization soared over the audience, carrying emotions that seemed to encompass his entire journey from despair to joy, from silence to song, from abandonment to belonging. The crowd was mesmerized by the beauty and depth of his musical expression, and many people openly wept as they listened to this dog who had learned to transform pain into something beautiful. The performance included several songs that had special significance to Storm's story. They played the folk song that had first coaxed him to vocalize, a lullaby that had comforted countless hospital patients, and an energetic piece that celebrated the joy of finding a forever home. For the final song, Maria invited the audience to join in humming along, creating a massive choir of humans and one very special dog, whose voice rose above them all in perfect harmony. As the concert concluded and the audience erupted in thunderous applause, Storm seemed to understand that this was a moment of recognition and celebration. He stood tall on the stage, his tail wagging proudly, as Maria knelt beside him with tears of joy streaming down her face. The little dog who had once sat silently in kennel number 7, seemingly broken by grief and loss, had become a beacon of hope and healing for an entire community. After the formal celebration ended, Storm and Maria spent time visiting the current shelter animals. Storm seemed particularly drawn to the dogs who appeared sad or withdrawn, and his gentle presence and soft vocalizations seemed to provide comfort even to animals who had never heard him sing before. Several of the shelter volunteers commented that the other dogs appeared calmer and more hopeful after Storm's visit, as if his presence reminded them that better days were possible. The anniversary celebration marked a turning point in Storm's public career. While he and Maria continued their therapy work with favorite patients and facilities, they gradually reduced their travel and performance schedule to focus on enjoying their daily life together. Storm's legacy, however, continued to grow through the many programs and initiatives that had been inspired by his story. The book Maria wrote about their experiences, titled Finding Voice: A Dog's Journey from Silence to Song, became a bestseller and inspired animal lovers around the world. The proceeds from book sales funded a special program at the shelter that provided extra support and enrichment for animals recovering from trauma. Several therapy dog programs incorporated musical elements into their training, though none produced another dog quite like Storm. Universities continued to study recordings of Storm's vocalizations, and his contribution to understanding animal cognition and interspecies communication became part of academic curricula in veterinary medicine, animal behavior, and music therapy programs. His story was featured in documentaries, children's books, and educational materials that helped spread awareness about the intelligence and emotional complexity of rescued animals. As Storm entered his senior years, his daily routine remained centered around music and the quiet joy of life with Maria. Their morning piano sessions became gentler and more contemplative, but Storm's love for musical expression never dimmed. Even when arthritis made it difficult for him to move around as easily as before, his voice remained strong and beautiful, a testament to the healing power of finding one's purpose in life. On quiet evenings, as Maria and Storm sat together making music in their cozy home, it was hard to imagine that this confident, joyful dog had once been a silent, heartbroken animal waiting to die in a shelter kennel. Storm's journey from despair to triumph had not only transformed his own life but had touched thousands of others who had witnessed the power of second chances, the healing nature of music, and the incredible bonds possible between humans and animals. Storm's story became a lasting reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can emerge in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it takes only one person willing to listen, one moment of connection, and one voice finding the courage to sing again to change everything. Through his silly, beautiful howls and his generous heart, Storm had shown the world that healing comes not from forgetting pain, but from transforming it into something that brings joy to others. His legacy lived on in every therapy session that incorporated music, every rescued animal that found a loving home, and every person who learned that the most profound healing often comes from the most unlikely sources. Storm had truly been given a second chance, and he had used it to give hope and healing to countless others, proving that love and music could overcome even the deepest sorrows.